Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in welcoming our television and webcast viewers. My name is Andrew Graham, a Vice President of the Canadian Club of Toronto and today's event host. Viewers, we are very pleased that you're joining us for the event today. For 120 seasons, the Canadian Club has been proud to provide a forum for leaders in every aspect of society to share their thoughts on the issues and ideas that matter. Through our programs and activities, we offer access to dynamic political, business, and public figures. Today's Global Leaders Series is a great example. Before I formally introduce today's speaker, here's a preview of some of our upcoming events. On Tuesday, February 21st, we'll have Senator Peter Harder. He'll be here at the club to talk about the transformation taking place in Canada's Senate. And on the next day, February 22nd, we'll have the 2016 Lifetime Achievement Awards. This year's recipient is the incredible Bonnie Brooks, speaking about turnarounds and leadership. To order your tickets and learn more about the club, please visit our website, canadianclub.org. You can also join the conversation via Twitter and Instagram by following us at CDNCLUBTO or by using that hashtag. I want to express special thanks today to the event sponsors Blake's, represented by Brock Gibson, and the China Construction Bank, represented by Sun Nien Bei. Thank you for your generous support. Let me now acknowledge the youth and young leaders from Empower Canada who are here with us today, thanks to the support of CIBC. And where are you? Oh, over there. Over there. And now today's speaker. There's no question that trade is critical to Canada's economy, yet rarely in the past decades has the climate for trade been more, shall we say, complex than it is today. At the same time, innovation is a word on everyone's lips. For large established businesses like Canada's banks, fast-changing technology is an opportunity, but it's also a challenge. McKinsey, where our speaker once worked, estimated that 60% of retail banking profits are vulnerable to technological disruption. So trade and innovation, perhaps the two most urgent themes in politics and business today. Well, I have some great news. Our speaker today knows a lot about both of these topics. On innovation in particular, I've had personal experience with Mr. Dodig's approach. I lead Borwell, a financial technology company that is working with his team to bring cutting-edge experience to customers. Mr. Dodig was named president and CEO of the CIBC group of companies in 2014. Before his current role, he served as group head of wealth management for 3 years. He also held senior appointments with UBS and Merrill Lynch. A member of CIBC's board of directors, the Harvard MBA graduate also serves on the board of the C.D. Howe Institute, as well as the Royal Ontario Museum's board of governors. Mr. Dodig is a founding chair of the 30% Club of Canada. He serves on the Catalyst Canada Advisory Board. In these governance roles, he actively promotes the advancement of women to executive positions and on boards. Two last notes before I turn the podium over to Mr. Dodig. First, I'm told that he's a big believer, and these stories I'm told are true, but we'll see from his reaction. First, I'm told that he's a big believer in early morning spinning classes, and that, in fact, one time the teacher didn't show up, and he took over the class. So if any of you go to whatever spinning club he goes to, you may see Mr. Dodig teaching a spinning class in the near future. And the second one, and I really hope this is true, and I hope you'll tell us, he actually has dabbled before as a comedian. And I heard that apparently he even opened one time for Jerry Seinfeld. He's shaking his head. It was a fun, well, so I'm not sure if the story of that event or any of the jokes from that event fit in with the theme of trade and innovation, but I very much hope they do. Mr. Dodig, the Canadian Club of Toronto's podium is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't think I've been called Mr. Dodig that much in a long, long time. Everyone just calls me Victor, but I want to tell you it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. I'm not going to practice I did win Humor Me 2 years ago. We were raising money for Mount Sinai, and that year was for Sunnybrook. Last year was for Mount Sinai, and I won by just talking about my immigrant background. It's very interesting. It'd probably be more interesting than the speech, but I'm going to stick to the script. Okay? It's a real pleasure with you, to be here with you to talk about our country's future, to give you some thoughts on our economy, on innovation, and on trade, and how Canada can succeed in the global marketplace. I wanted to start off with a little joke. I have teenagers at home, and usually they're not jokes that are appropriate to share with an esteemed audience like this, but it's appropriate for this setting. We're talking about the past, we're talking about the future. So what did the digital clock say to the grandfather clock? Look, Grandpa, no hands. And it's that's kind of cute, right? And that whole adage of no hands, I think, applies to a world that we're living in today, a world that is unsettled, a world that is going through disruption. And the only thing I'd encourage each of us to do is to think differently. And I think it's really important that we think differently, not to forget our past, to be reflective of our past, but recognize that the world around us is changing. From a business perspective, more and more countries are trying to figure out how do they compete. And you hear a lot of this in the press in these much coveted global supply chains. These supply chains that are complex. They're no longer just producing goods in one factory and sending them out to another one. They involve the application of brain power. Many times they involve products that crisscross borders. Many times before they see the light of day and the end consumer or company gets to use them. And that's what makes the discussion out there reach a level of anxiety, because people are saying, sometimes I don't know if the politicians, at least some politicians, understand the complexity. They're also impacting the way we organize ourselves in business. And as business leaders, I think we need to be mindful of all these changes, and we need to continue to advocate to stay on the right path rather than go backwards. This complicated geopolitical landscape that we're facing today is, I think, unprecedented. It's probably the most unprecedented we've seen since World War II. You know, I don't know how many of you felt that the Brits were going to vote for Brexit, but it's really upended Europe and the way Europe's been organized since the Treaty of Rome. And when you see what Europe is facing today with the Netherlands and the French and the Italians and very important players going through very difficult elections, it could upend things some more. A reason to be anxious, for sure. The US election that sometimes I think didn't finish yet. We continue to live with the day in and day out of where things are going. And really at core, the population's questioning the status quo, both on the right and the left. You know, if I used to be able to work hard and benefit, why can't that be the same thing today? And my answer to that is the world has changed. I know it's not a fair answer, but it has changed. And for us as Canadians, we need to recognize that these risks are very real and we choose to ignore them at our peril. We also have to recognize that this isn't the first time that we've gone through an economic disruption in the world. We've gone through waves of economic disruption. Sorry, that had been a Freudian slip. You know, the agrarian revolution, where people moved from peasant farming to more commercial farming, the industrial revolution, where people were thrown out of jobs as new technology entered the factories. Business models evolve, right? Today, I'll give you an example of how things change. So our bank trades commodities like our competitors do to satisfy our clients' varying needs. We trade them on our trading floor. Less than 100 years ago, this is where you found the commodities at CIBC, right in front of our building. That is the Commerce Building that was built in the 1930s and was the tallest building in the British Empire until the 60s. Commodities were right next door, almost like in our backyard. You don't have to go far in terms of disruption to just look at mobile banking. Let me show you a photo of what mobile banking used to be like. That's a real picture. It wasn't staged. That was in the 50s. That was in the prairies. And today when someone says mobile banking, you think this. So disruption's occurring. Some of the terms that are being used are similar, but it's forcing us to think differently. If someone said mobile banking to you in the 50s versus today, you need to think differently to see the future. And I asked myself, why does this disruption today feel like it's creating so much anxiety? Because it's not the first time we've seen it. You know, there are protests, there's the rise of populism, and I really think the technology that's disrupted and displaced many people out of their jobs or out of their opportunities is the same technology that's being used by these people to amplify their thoughts. It's a derivative of it, right? And this is why we're living in a very different time. People are communicating their anxiety using that technology. They're using Twitter. Some of us know who use Twitter regularly. Some of us follow it more regularly than we used to. Facebook and other media to get their issues across. And it's exacerbating their anxiety. The second thing that's happened over the last number of decades, particularly over the last decade, is low interest rates have created a high reliance on asset ownership and asset inflation and a dependence on debt. And no one's relying on their savings any longer. You know, this whole old-fashioned notion of savings has gone away. And that creates economic and personal anxiety for people as well. They've borrowed, savers are being punished, people don't see the opportunities they used to see, and one might feel despair, one might feel hand-wringing. I don't think we should. I think there's lots of reasons to feel optimistic about the future. There's lots of reasons to believe that this disruption, well managed and well understood, actually creates opportunities. And today's talk is about really that opportunity that can get created for Canada. Before we talk about our country, I just wanted to highlight how it's helped the banking industry. You know, the fintechs, it's a weird world, right? Three years ago, we wouldn't have talked to each other. Now, like, we're working together. And he's introducing me and calling me Mr. Dodig. Anyway, just goes to show you, nothing can be predicted, right? But it's funny, right? Who knows? I'll be coming without a tie, and you'll be without a tie. And where's Ruffalo? Is Ruffalo here? I thought I saw John Ruffalo with his jeans earlier. Anyway, he's always doing things in the venture space and looking pretty cool. That's what we all want to look down the road. But fintechs have recognized, and we've recognized as banks, CIBC in particular, that we're going to embrace the fintechs where it makes sense for our clients because they can help transform our business. And I think they've increasingly focused on the fact that, well, rather than eating away just at your revenue base of $15 billion, maybe we can help you reduce your expense base of $8.5 billion and make your clients happier. And that's what's beginning to occur. So this disruption that was kind of facing us 3 years ago, where everyone's wringing their hands and saying, what are we going to do next, has really turned out to be an opportunity. The very beginnings of an opportunity, but one I think that'll flourish over time. You know, our small business clients are benefiting from a partnership we formed with Thinking Capital out of Montreal. Thinking Capital is focused on lending to small business. They can advance a credit in 72 hours. We can take as long as 14 days, right, because of the paperwork that's involved. Reconfiguring those processes that we have in the very thick middle of our bank can be advanced by partnering with fintechs, can be advanced by this disruption. The same thing comes to sending money overseas. So if I were to do this speech in November of 2015 to the Canadian Club, and I were to talk to our clients, and they'd say, how do I get foreign exchange at CIBC if I'm a consumer? I'd say, well, you have to go to a branch. You have to line up. We try to strive for short lineups, so you don't have to wait too long. But once you get to the wicket, it'll take 20 minutes to process a transaction, and we're going to charge you $35. And then we'll send the money overseas. So fast forward, less than 2 years later, today you can send money to 46 countries from your CIBC mobile banking account because we partnered with a fintech. The fintech charges us a small variable cost, we eat it. The client pays no upfront fees. What used to be a 30-minute plus exercise is now 3 minutes and cheaper. It's better for everybody. The client wins, the fintech wins, the bank wins and our shareholders, most importantly, win. The same thing holds true for Borrowell. Now, we've just started. I was asking Andrew about the statistics, and things are going well. Or we're going to focus on that more, aren't we, Andrew? It's just early days. But we're very excited about our partnership with Borrowell, where we're going to be able to advance personal credit to our personal clients at a much faster pace in a much more technologically friendly way than we have in the past. Everybody wins. So fintechs have forced us to become more competitive, and they've forced us to rethink the way we do banking. Fortunately, I have a great team who've kind of embraced that. We've created all kinds of opportunities for young, aspiring people who want to work at a bank and don't see it as a boring career, but actually see it as a way to change the world and have a sense of purpose in their jobs. We've transformed ourselves, and CIBC is now thinking differently. As I said to you at the outset, I think in times of disruption, it's really, really important that we think differently. I don't want to talk about banking now. I want to stop there. I want to talk about Canada. And I want to talk about how we positioned our country to think differently in these highly anxious and disruptive times. And I think there's really three key areas that we need to focus on as a country to deal with the disruption at hand and to maintain our standard of living for those of us in the room who are generally more privileged, and for those of us across the country who probably feel very anxious. And that is, one, close the education output gap. What is the education output gap? Our schools aren't producing the right skills for our students, so we create the right jobs. There's too much of a focus on more jobs as opposed to the right jobs. Canada should position itself in the world so that we create the right jobs where we can maintain a higher standard of living that we've become accustomed to. So not more jobs, but the right jobs, and more of the right jobs. The second thing is that I believe, and many people believe, that we need more patient long-term capital, particularly in our small and medium-sized business sector. The larger companies, the publicly listed companies, generally have access to capital. The smaller companies need better access to capital so that they can grow, they can increase their productivity, and I'll share with you some statistics in a moment that might shock you, and they can achieve scale, and they can operate in Canada in perpetuity. That's what we need. And the third thing is we need to continue in this world where people are talking about changes and protection. We need to advocate for more trade with more countries. Free trade and fair trade matters. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. But above all, it's more trade that will grow the economic pie and improve our standard of living. And these three areas are all inextricably linked. It's not doing one or the other, but done well, done in a coordinated fashion, I truly believe that Canada can steep well above the 2% growth that we've been experiencing on an annual basis over the last decade. Not good. If we continue on that path, we won't be a G7 or G20, we'll be a G50 country. It's, I think, helpful to look back at what's happened over the last 10 years just to give some perspective on how we think about things going forward. So it's conventional wisdom that we've weathered the storm quite well relative to many other countries in the world. But we still did lose a significant amount of our economic capacity, much of which will not come back in its previous form. And I think everybody's recognizing that more and more. I always use the example because I drive down to the QEW with my kid to the soccer game, and you see the Rubbermaid Newell plant on the south side. I think some of you know where that is. It's no longer there. It's not coming back. It's not coming back in its previous form. It's not coming back if the dollar goes to 60 cents. That's not the way you improve your standard of living. We've lost over 200,000 manufacturing jobs since 2008. But that's not simply a recent phenomenon. We've actually been shifting out of the manufacturing sector to the service sector. We need to do both of those, go into value-added manufacturing, but focus more and more on the service sector as we go forward. But 200,000 jobs that aren't coming back. But an enormous amount of jobs have been created in the service sector, which is why our unemployment rate still seems to be at a reasonable level. So when it comes to natural resources, people will say, well, that's the past. It's not the future. We need to focus on green energy. I don't think anybody can disagree with the fact that we want to be environmentally friendly, but the energy patch is part of our family business, as our chairman, the Honorable John Manley, would say. We ignore it at our peril. And in fact, if you look at the prospects for Canada in 2017, the energy business is going to be contributing to economic growth. But really, we need to move beyond energy and beyond financial services and beyond traditional manufacturing to think about creating that fourth pillar of the Canadian economy, which for us is still small. But it's that diversified spectrum of manufacturing and service economy that produces goods at the higher value added end of the economy so that we can create the right kind of jobs and have the right standard of living for our population. And Canada can stand tall amongst nations who are squabbling around trade agreements. We're focusing on the long term and how to change our economy, how to shift our economy so that we win in the long run. We have a lot of work to do. If you look at where that growth will come from, much of it will come from the small and medium-sized business sector. And the small and medium-sized business sector is an important part of our economy. Statistics Canada did a study. They looked at Canadian small businesses, US small businesses. So in the US, small companies account for 56% of total hours worked. So a majority of the economy. And when you look at their productivity as they measured it, they were 70% as productive as large companies. Okay, I get it. Now they looked at Canada. So in Canada, the small, medium-sized business sector accounted for 70% of hours worked. That being a disproportionately larger part of our economy than in the US. And then they looked at the productivity of Canadian small and medium-sized businesses. They were 47% as productive as large companies. So it's a bigger part of our economy and it's a less productive part of our economy. It's the part of our economy that can be the growth engine. Yes, financial institutions will play a role in helping them grow. But we need to think differently about how to help them close that productivity gap, how to help them compete globally. Because signing trade agreements and opening up new markets is helpful. But opening it up to the small and medium-sized business sector and providing them with the resources to grow into those new economies is what's going to give us that standard of living. So those three things I talked about, I want to elaborate on now. That education output gap. It's a real problem. And it's being tackled in pockets, but it's not being tackled as fundamentally as it could be. We mentioned McKinsey, the fear-mongering that 60% of retail bag profits are going to disappear in a few years. I don't believe that. But real surveys, I do believe. They did do I have a lot of respect for them. I know Dominic and the whole crowd there. They're a good company. They did a survey. I used to work there, so you have, alumni, esteemed alumni. They did a survey amongst educators, and 83% of educators said our students are ready for the workforce. Then they talked to the employers, and 2/3 of the employers thought they were ready for the workforce. Then they talked to the graduates, and just over 50% thought they were from the workforce. Seems as though we're talking past one another. And I think you all recognize some of the problems that are exhibited by these statistics. We've got a gap. University graduates are overqualified for the jobs they take, and the frustration felt by employers when they can't find graduates with the skills they need. So how do we close that? How do we make sure that we're producing the right types of students with the right types of skills to satisfy those value-added jobs that we need? Well, an increased focus on the STEM disciplines is really important. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Canada lags behind in that regard. And when it comes to women in STEM, 32% of STEM programs have women, 68% have men. Some of the short-term things that we're going to fix are going to benefit the long term. To try and fix them in the short term, you don't get the kind of results you want. We need to change that. We need that focus on that STEM discipline. We need more collaboration between the private sector and academic institutions. So this fall, I've come to learn of Shopify, a very well-regarded Canadian technology company, is partnering with Carleton because they were hiring computer science graduates. And hiring them, finding that they didn't have the practical knowledge that they needed to hit the ground running. So now what they're doing is in their first year, they're going to bring them in not only to learn their curriculum, but to learn the practical skills of what they need so that when they graduate, they're productive. Too much time is lost focusing simply on the theoretical and not on the practical. Similarly, IBM. Ginny Rometty and her company created this program called P-Tech in the US. These are ideas that I think are worth exploring. P-TECH is focused on creating a 6-year program for students that want to go right from high school to an applied skill. And they go to high school and community college and learn technology and focus on STEM disciplines. And now it's evolving from not only New York State, but 3 other states are adopting it, thinking differently about education. And this is not to talk down a liberal arts education, but if we're going to be in the value-added sector as an economy, we need to start thinking differently about producing the graduates that can hit the ground running with real skills. That is a gap. That education output gap is very real. We need to think differently. The second thing I talked about was long-term patient capital. Now, the banks and other lenders and other investors play an important role in the ecosystem today in helping our companies grow. But it's our belief that there's a gap today. And we've been, with other financial institutions, in discussions with the government about creating a sizable Canadian business growth fund to help the small and medium-sized sector. I'll explain what it means in a second. It's a fund that the UK has tried twice, once after World War II successfully, and again after the financial crisis. They raised over 2 billion sterling, and they're investing in UK businesses that help grow the UK economy across the UK, across sectors. The fund here would seek to fill gaps in the current Canadian funding landscape, where there are limited options today. So, we lend to small business, as our competitors do. There's equity capital, particularly in the startup phase, provided by the venture funders that we have an ample amount of in our country. But research shows that the entrepreneurs that run these companies in our country, they hit a wall at a certain point where venture funding is no longer available to them. They want to continue to control their company and grow their company. They can't really tap the capital markets, the public capital markets. They need long-term patient capital that has a minority ownership stake and is long-term in nature and evergreen in nature. The proposal that we're contemplating is a business growth fund that has 2 components. One is the financial component, where we would all contribute to this fund. We put in a management team, we put on an independent board, we put in all the right incentives to help them grow. But the second part of the plan is not just the money, but it's what I call the IQ and the NQ, to help these companies with mentors and advisors, creating this pool of expert advisors who are either retired or active executives, academics or specialists in particular areas that can help these companies access talent, that can help mentor the owners, that can help access these international markets that these trade agreements are opening up for us. Because many of these domestic companies don't even know where to get started when they think about selling their goods and services abroad. What's interesting about the Business Growth Fund in Canada is it's a private sector initiative. It's financial institutions coming together to help the small and medium-sized business sector and generate a return for our shareholders. And the government has simply come together to convene us, to say, we think this is a good idea, we think you should go do this. And I'm confident that we're well on the path to creating that growth engine for our Canadian economy and filling that capital gap that exists. I have to have a sip of my Evian water because there's no Canadian water here. I'm kidding. Okay. I like Evian water. I like the bottle. It's kind of cool. So, let me talk about the third thing, and that's trade. This is where I think we need to be loud voices for open trade and recognize that, yes, agreements need to be adjusted as the economy modernizes, but really focus on more trade rather than looking at agreements that can be changed as a euphemism for protectionism. That is dangerous. That is very dangerous. And we as Canadians, while I recognize we can't compete on the scale of the US or Germany or China, we can compete on skill, strategy, and innovation, and we must advocate for open trade in order for our economy to thrive. The other interesting statistic is when you talk about innovation, companies that are innovative are more likely to trade than those companies that aren't innovative. These things all hang together. Remember the 3 things I talked to you about at the very beginning? They are all inextricably linked. Closing that education output gap, providing the funding for those sectors, advocating for that trade because they will get our goods, our Canadian-produced goods to the rest of the world. And innovation is a term that's used too frequently nowadays. I use it too frequently. We think about it as the tech sector. And we have a thriving tech sector across our country. We want to see it continue to grow. We want to see it continue to stay in Canada. But we also have innovation happening across all our other sectors. It's happening in financial services. It's happening in the oil patch, where our oil sands producers are thinking about solvent technologies to produce energy in a more environmentally friendly fashion, in a more economically friendly fashion. It's happening in our banks. It's happening at CIBC. We're not a utility. We can think of ourselves as utility, but we're not. We perform a utilitarian function. We're not a technology company. Lots of times you'll hear bankers say, we're a technology company. We're not. We're a bank. We take deposits. We help families finance their homes. We help businesses grow. But we are a bank that's thinking about how to change ourselves to deal with these modern times, to not lose our competitive edge. And that's what I think our country needs to do. I see many points of light outside of our own industry with the upstarts, like Andrew's and others of you who are in upstart companies. I see points of light in, I'll give you an example. So think about innovation across sectors. Murad Al-Khatib, he runs a company called AGT in Saskatchewan. He's born in Davidson, Saskatchewan. He's the son of a Turkish doctor, father who immigrated to Canada, and a mother who was born in Saskatchewan. He's created a company, worked for the government, recognized that there was a need around the world to get pulse crops to the rest of the world. India, the Middle East. And he knew that Saskatchewan was the ideal place to do that. This company is now worth $1 billion today. It ships goods to 120 countries. But he's just not shipping raw goods. He's investing in the value-added component of packaging and shelling and new products and byproducts of what he's created to create more margin for his shareholders. Murad is an example of innovation in the agriculture sector. And we have to think about innovation beyond technology and the technology sector alone. We have to think about all of the things that we're endowed with in Canada: agriculture, energy, etc., and even some of the traditional manufacturing businesses. I like to use an example of a company called NewCap in Canada, right down the street in Scarborough. They're a client of ours. They produce adhesives for brake pads. They produced over 750 million of them, shipped them around the world, and they've never had a failure. What they've done is they put money into R&D to create this grip metal adhesive that has now gone. If we address them well,